So I'm Tara, and it's an amazing opportunity to have such a space. It doesn't really exist. I don't have to make work that can sell, or it's just about being in this beautiful space and feeling the world around me. So I've loved being here. I do not love talking about my work as much. But so one of the things that I was hoping to do is demonstrate what's called a visual thinking strategies discussion, which is based on research that my mom, Abigail Housen, did starting in the late 70s, early 80s, into how people look at art. And she was interested in that time why museums had so few people in them, and why you can have, a free, open space full of amazing work, and it's just people with PhDs in art history that were there. Like, what was happening that even when the doors are open, the doors are closed. And she interviewed thousands, and now we have probably tens of thousands of interviews. Had just open-ended interviews, taking people in front of a piece of artwork and having them talk. Where are your eyes now? What are you looking at? And what's going on? And based on those interviews, she broke down all the thought units that she could find. So an unfinished sentence was a thought unit. A long reverie about the color that Monet used at this period in his life is another thought unit. Like associations, judgments, observations, and found that there's a development from a beginner viewer to over time with looking, what you're interested in, what you look at, what matters to you changes as you look at artwork. And she was interested in beginner viewers because, the museums were clearly meeting the needs of people who'd looked at art a lot, but the people who didn't feel comfortable, hadn't grown up in a family going to museums or looking at artwork, they didn't know what to look at. And what the tours were telling them, what the wall texts were saying, was just nothing.
Yeah. Wasn't meeting them where they were.
Exactly. And so she'd done this research and published her thesis, and then started working at a bunch of different museums. And I'm getting to this because you said you want to hear it too. And she said she went to the MoMA and was working at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and was working with their staff. And they were like, look at these amazing tours we have. People love these tours. And they do love them. But she said, fine, give me people who've just had a tour, and she'd take them immediately after a tour and have them walk her around the museum, giving the tour back to her. And there was no, there was no evidence that what the tour guide, the information the tour guide had given and what the person had received was the same. It was just not being retained. And they could say it was a great talk, but that it wasn't, none of the information that person was giving had actually been received. And that started, so Philip Yenowin, who was head of education at the MoMA at that time, left to start a company with her. He was like, all right, let's get serious about this. I'm changing what I want to do here. And this is not just about museum education, this is about education, period. What does it mean to train an educator to meet someone where they are? So they started developing this curriculum that now is called Visual Thinking Strategies. My mom is dead, and at this point, her work has changed, and the work they did has changed museum education all over the world. Like almost every museum across the world has been influenced by this, and it's now in a lot of public schools and private schools and colleges, and the new big thing is medical school, because they found with medical students, when you do this kind of practice of talking about art, that doctors make more observations, make better observations, use more empathy, listen better. And so, like, just Harvard this semester now has visual thinking strategies on their roster of training for the, but anyhow, so that's the long discussion of my mom's work. And there's a bunch of like wonderful VTS people in here. So what that means is, instead of, is that we would facilitate a conversation all together as a group. So we're gonna be asking all of you to just talk about what you see. And there's no wrong answers, there's no right answers, there's no judgment about what you see. This is like, in a way, a gift to me too, because I'm not so interested in hearing myself talk about my artwork. I have to listen to myself think about my artwork. So the gift, it's like an amazing opportunity to hear what other people think, and as a community kind of figure it out together. And JC will be facilitating and start the whole conversation off, and
you'll get a chance to hear from Tara, and she will answer your questions. And if you have questions, we're going to ask you to sort of hold them as we go, because as we do this discussion together, as we create this space in this room together, you're probably going to have some questions, but we're going to wait to hear from Tara until the end, at least her perspective. So what I'm going to do is kind of invite you to spend just a few moments looking at the art. And I know we're all facing right here, but please spend some time also just looking around the room. And as we start to talk and make meaning together, feel free to, reference some of the other spaces, the other pieces in the room. We don't just have to focus here. But I'm just going to step aside and let you spend a couple of minutes just looking.
Leave it here. It's called Sown in the Half-Light.
Zone?
Sown as in, like, you sow seeds.
Oh, I see.
Thank you.
You can't hear them.
You sound great though.
Okay.
Anybody close to that mic's gonna sound good.
Okay, so maybe I'll just hold it and be able to pass it. Does that make sense?
Well, I don't forget, I haven't been to one of these before, so
Okay.
I don't want to mess up your flow.
No, I think it's good because the whole thing is about people hearing each other. So if you can't hear them, then it won't work.
It's like two little soccer ball sized boards I can hear Tara
Okay.
and
Okay.
I started by looking at the work, so I'm skipping that right now. But I'm going to go get my caffeine drink in the front, so I won't sleep through the whole thing.
Okay, great. So when you're back, have a seat, and then I'll invite everybody to have a seat. How's that sound?
Well, sit down before me. It's all right.
Okay. So I'm going to pass the microphone so people can we can hear it in the video. See, they're looking. We've already succeeded. They're looking.
That's so cool.
And I'll just invite you to take another minute and then come have a seat with us. And the one thing is we might experiment a little bit with this microphone so that you can be heard on the video also. But the whole point is that we can hear one another as we have this discussion. Okay. Okay. So, what's going on in this art? I'm sorry, who said that I saw? Okay. What do you see that makes you say movement? Where are you looking?
When I walk in through the barn doors, the first time I saw the work, I wanted to run around the perimeter of the room and just follow the perimeter, the low pieces of work. And then it sort of changed as I got to the end of that area, but I feel like a lot of movement.
So a lot of movement we're feeling as we come. In the space itself is inviting the movement, and then the art and the way that it feels like it's bringing you around the room. Right? What more can we find? Can we go here and then here?
Yeah, I was going to say growth also and circulation. And there's a lot of volume that I didn't see until I went very close. That the forms are abstract, but there's a lot of space when you actually move into them. Or organic growth, bone, vein, like that.
So can you maybe maybe point us in one area where you were particularly noticing? We're talking about growth, some density when you get close. Is that what you were saying about the space?
Like there's space.
It's reminding you of bone and. So it feels abstract, but what you're seeing in it is some organic material, the space, some bone. Is there a particular area that we can look at as for what you're talking about, or are you sort of looking at it in all of it?
I think across all of it in a way, like in the way that these vertical forms suggest trees, and this one especially. This is almost like you can see like an esophagus and organs, and then going into a kind of head.
So we're looking here. Okay. So did you all hear that? We're looking sort of here. We're looking all over at this idea of bone and organic space. And over here in particular, this is reminding me of an esophagus going up possibly into a head. Okay. What more can we find? Oh, wait. I was supposed to come back to you. I'm remembering.
Just saying similar things, sensuality, organic growth. Sensuality.
So tell us more about sensuality. What do you see that's making you say sensuality?
I see phallic symbols, I see explosions, I see eruptions, I see roots.
So roots, explosions, some phallic symbols. Are we looking around the room for sensuality? Okay, what more can we find? I had one here.
There's a kind of heaving, a kind of propulsion. I feel there's a kind of aliveness that's going on. I'm completely riveted by what I experience as the underneath.
Okay, so there's this emotion too, sort of like the movement. There's this emotion that's coming that feels like the art
it's the essential
heaving.
isness of the work.
Is the heaving and
Is the heaving. It feels very alive and propulsive, like something that's also trying to emerge.
So we're in the space where we have to use our hands to kind of describe what we're feeling here, right? This propulsion.
Words are not really.
It's hard to describe with words. It's very much of movement and feeling. And you're really drawn to sort of this underspace too, right? We've been talking about sort of this explosions, the up, and we're also really drawn to this space underneath that feels propulsive. What more can we find?
Well, there's a lot of gesture and great amount of movement. This piece in particular makes me think of music.
Okay.
Sound and a kind of clearly like a crescendo of at the top, which has many dimensions of circular motion,
But it's interesting to see how you go from this very abstract gestural notations on the horizontal plane, and then you bring it up to some conclusion at the top.
So I'm going to come back over here and sorry, with the microphone, it's a little tricky. What I would like to have done is been able to pointing as you were talking about this. So again, we were talking about this idea of this movement up and this explosion up here. We had an idea of it sort of reminding us of a body part, an esophagus into a head. This is reminding you of movement, of music, because it's sort of the circular motion. So where you were talking about down here too, sort of, we were talking about the gesture that's in the lines of the work.
All these, like this gestural mark,
Feeling musical.
yeah, I mean, it just kind of all comes and peaks at the...
Up here. What more can we find? 1, 2.
Well, I like everything in the show. It helps us to recognize that diversity, that beauty comes from. Beauty comes in many forms. And I'm very much like this over here, which I want to call a briar patch.
This area?
Yes. I think it shows the chaos in nature. If you look into the underground of the forest around here, you'll see all these twigs and branches overlapping. And then you go to the other end, the top of this sort of, I would call it a floral kind of shape, where the forms are more well defined. And, there isn't quite the chaos that we see down in the briar patch. But so that's also beautiful. And of course, those shapes up there can remind of eggs and seashells and so on. It doesn't really matter whether they represent anything or not. They're just beautiful shapes. And I think the way they merge together is excellent compositional strategy.
I'm going to try to paraphrase that, and you can correct me if I miss it. There was a lot there about the beauty and the nature, how this is reminding him of the nature. And starting over here, sort of looking at what sort of feels like some more chaotic marks here that are reminding him of a briar patch. Like this, it's beautiful, it's nature, but it's wild, and it's sort of more like a briar patch. And then the marks kind of move together here and become more cohesive in these beautiful circle shapes that are reminiscent of shells or stones, eggs, birds' nests. And they don't have to necessarily represent anything. It's all this beauty, but that it's reminding you of kind of the beauty in nature. Did I get most of that? Right. Yes.
Can I start?
Yeah.
So I see forces competing with each other. So I'm really drawn to the vertical pieces around the area, around the space. And like at first glance, I saw something was growing out of the ground. It's moving upward. But like at second glance, I saw something basically going with the gravity, coming down to the ground. And I feel like you can interpret either way, and it's kind of similar to the round shapes in those works where you see something was trying to get out of it, but like at the same time, the shapes, like the cutted shapes, actually are forcing them to stay inside. Yeah.
So, all right, let's come back to that. Let me start from the beginning of that comment, and then I want to come back to that last part. So we've had lots of ideas. We're really, drawn to this kind of upward shape. We've been talking about them as sort of going up, seeing them as going up, phallic shapes, eruptions. But you're saying actually there's something about them too as you continue to look that are making you think of the being brought down.
It could be a moment when there are fruits coming down from the trees.
So let's go back. So then you said about these circle shapes, that there's something about the circle shapes that are being held in when really what they might want to do is come down. Like they could be fruits. They're kind of reminding you of that competing notion between up and down, gravity and. Did I get that?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Explosion and containment.
explosion and containment, so sort of the duality in this work. Again, this movement, this propulsion, but also the containment, the gravity. What more? Did I have another hand that I'm forgetting? Yes. Do you mind talking to this?
So I, excuse me, I was here for the benefit, and Tara's pieces, can I mention, is that okay? Yeah. Tara's pieces were hung all over the walls, and truthfully, it was so dense for me, it was too chaotic. So coming in today, and that's really why I wanted to come to the lecture, I wanted to understand a little bit what's going on. But coming in today, it's kind of like it's been calmed down for me, and it's really beautiful. And like this, which I do remember, was the outstanding thing when I was here at the benefit. I really liked that a lot. It was because there was a little bit of definition, I think, and maybe the containment. But this is really very lovely, and being able to see these growths or pillars or up and downs, it all stands out in a clarity for me. So it's just very pleasant.
So there's the paring down. So
Yeah.
the benefit, was that with the drawings, everybody on the wall? Yeah. So for those of you who weren't here, when there was a benefit and there was work everywhere across the walls, and it felt overwhelming, is what you were saying for you. It was too much to take in, and there is something about this where there is this density that we've talked about, but there's also space, and that it's made it easier for you to enter, easier for you to appreciate and sort of spend some time with. And the propulsion, and again, this kind of space feeling contained, there's something, again, about the containment and the explosion, and that this is now, did I get everything? Okay. What more can we find? Yes. Variety. Say more.
Just looking at the vertical portions, and within them, there's so much variety. Some looks like very primitive struggle of scribble, and some looks like purposeful design. And
Pause for 1 second there, because I'd love for you to point out what you're seeing. There's, again, the contrast, right? There's the sort of primitive, feeling more primitive, and feeling very purposeful.
This looks like very primitive scribbling to me.
Okay,
And then over here, this looks like very deliberate design and detail down here. Almost like just feels very purposeful. And then, of course, these are just very, to me, they're very sophisticated.
Thank you. So we'll invite you all to come up and look a little closer after, but we're really now getting into sort of this micro level of really looking at these marks, because maybe at first glance they feel similar, and then as you get close and look at closer, you see like these marks feel very different. They almost feel like kind of scribbles, kind of quickly done, maybe not carefully thought out in terms of what they might be. Whereas over here, we're looking at down in these spaces where it feels more contained and more purposeful, and maybe there's a little different process that went into this over here. We can find out from Tara afterwards. Do we have any, maybe we'll start to, oh, Jess.
I just wanted to point out how each, not that they're individual pieces, but how each vertical piece and even the ground has kind of a human character to it, that they each feel very sort of individually, they have their own character and their own presence in a way that it feels to me as if I'm standing in a room full of characters, and they all have different personality, and I do feel like I'm in a room full of people or objects that have their own presence. And the other thing I wanted to say is there's a kind of really beautiful, what you were pointing out is the macro-micro, that you have these loose gestures that feel like earth tumbling and wind and, a real, sort of abstraction, and then they pull together in the micro, the way that nature, like a Fibonacci, in nature would sort of go from being this big object to this molecular structure, and that I feel like what the artist is trying to explore is is, you know, all of that kind of underneath the surface activity. But I'm cheating because I've been looking at it for forever.
All right, let me just, yeah, can I paraphrase what Jess just said? Just because I just think it's to kind of again revisit these ideas. This is sort of a new idea that Jess is bringing in of this feeling human in a way. Also, these kind of feeling that I'm in the space with, she's in the space, we're in the space with people because of the way that these shapes are built and they go up. You know, we've had this idea of phallic and trees and explosions and fruit, but that you're feeling a human quality to that. And that as part of that, again, that contrast, the big, the small, the micro, the macro, and wondering, and we'll get to hear from the artist herself, lucky us, about what is that exploration of kind of what's going on underneath the macro to the micro. Did I get all that, Jess?
Well, I can't imagine this work being done in any other place other than in this barn. And the choice of actually cutting things out of a sheet of paper and choosing to keep the sheet of paper and the relationship between the structure of the barn and the location of the panels. And so I think she's internalized certain organic forces of nature and reimagined them and juxtaposed them in a space in a very effective way. So there's this ongoing search in the evolution of these choices that she's made. And so there are ones that essentially respect the outline, the shape of the paper, and then ones that have broken free of the shape of the paper. And there's this one in the back that I think is this combination of shape-free and shape-dependent of the paper and illustrates that juxtaposition in ways that the others don't. The two that are over there in this search to find form and to cut shape, the two over there, I think, have a close juxtaposition between the scale of the piece, the found line, the found shape, both within the construction of the drawing, but the outline of the cutout of the piece. So there's a great deal of sympathy of the delicacy and the scale of the piece and the scale of the line, and they are quite compatible. I think it's a very effective show.
I hope you all got that. I'm going to try to paraphrase it, but that was a lot. Thank you. But what I think is really salient about that in particular is we've been talking a lot about the movement on the paper, right? The actual marks on the paper. And what you're really noticing and helping us notice is the way that the paper itself is being used, the way that the medium of the paper is being I think you were saying it's the juxtaposition of the kind of chaos of nature, but then also sort of containing it in a way that has it fit into this space and the way that she's used it here. And that juxtaposition in particular back here, is this the piece you were talking about where it's got, she's sort of has, I think you used the word respected the shape of the paper, and sort of the drawing has been contained by the paper, and then here it just kind of breaks free, right? She's made the choice to cut it out and let it be free of the structure and the space. And then we were also looking at these pieces up here, which feel a little different. You were talking about sort of the way of the use of the lines here and the difference in the use of the paper here as well and the shape. What am I missing? Okay, 1, 2.
Just to kind of add on to that, I was thinking about how the show was mounted and how arbitrary or not arbitrary it was in terms of the elements being constructed, in the space. And so it seems to me that these things could have been arranged in other ways, so there's a dynamism possible in the forms. So just as there's a lot of movement in the forms, there's also a sense of a sort of ecosystem that could go a different way. It's a system that could move.
Right. Okay. So we were looking at the way the paper was used, and you're sort of piggybacking off of that to think about wow, what were the choices that went into the way that she hung it in this space, and how that could have changed our interpretation, our sense of it, or even maybe the meaning of it, the dynamism of the way that these spaces, these pictures have sort of been hung together.
Yeah, it's like the barn itself is like one big giant drawing, and you could, like, what if those had been clustered really, tight together like a crowd, It could go different ways. But I think the whole point of, at least this work for me, what I love about it is that it conveys a sense of turbulence and high anxiety and changeability and erasing and adding, all of that constant state of flux. So it could look very different if she installed it again. But what I like is that I feel like, her drawings are in the state of being drawn, as you look at them.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting, Tara. I hope you're remembering all this. But just to, we'll end on that note, this idea again about like how she chose to put together and this feeling that you're having of this tumultuous sort of state in here. And maybe you can talk about that.
Thank you all. Thank you, JC. That was amazing. Thank you so much. That was really awesome to hear all of that. And you're all right. So I guess there's a couple, I wish I'd taken notes, but one thing to start with is in early Chinese painting manuals, they talk about the qi, the life force moving through a work. It's not something in Western artwork that we think about as much. Like we think about your skill or your ability to do perspective or your ability to shade. But in these old painting manuals, they would talk about if the life force like comes from the world and moves through an artwork and moves through the person looking and goes out, or like through the artist's arms as you're working into the paper and out, then you've done something important, even if the work looks like it's not that skilled, or it's not that well drawn, or it's not that beautifully colored and shaded. And this is something that was like very powerful to me to learn. And where like my interest lies in artwork is not being technically good, but to feel like, I feel like what I'm aiming for is for the work to feel alive and like to be propulsive or to be moving or to be, erupting. I want movement and I want it to be alive because I feel like, what else really matters? And I think it's the reason I make artwork is to like you feel the world alive around you. There's no way to properly express that. There's no way to draw that perfectly or paint that perfectly. It's just a matter of somehow moving some of that force into keeping on moving it through. Not even like packing it into an artwork and letting it sit there, but to just keep it moving if there's some way to just pass it on through to the next person that you see. And this was my interest in drawing. So I'm a drawer. I don't paint, I don't do anything else. I do actually glue a lot of the pieces of the drawings together into what is sort of sculpture technically. But what interests me in drawing is that force. Like it can be so tossed off and so kind of like urgent and sort of sloppy and like off the cuff, but that is its power to me, like that it's not a final thing, that often in artwork we're focused on this final product, and especially in a capitalist society, then we have to sell that final product. But all that work that people do, not just me, like all the artists and the bakers and the sewers and the quilters and the, all gardeners, all that work we do to just feel alive and feel that life force, I feel like sometimes that's there more in the partially done piece than in the final piece. Like sometimes we get to the final piece and we've finished something and we've made it perfect and we've made it beautiful and it's like kind of dead. So I can make dead stuff too, drawing. It's not like just drawing makes alive things, but I am interested in that. And so all of the language that you were using was so interesting to me for having that kind of force in it. And I think also like the underneath, like so these I thought of kind of as the dirt, or the underneath, and like the raw, like wild, chaotic, uncontrolled part that things come out of. But if you're all wild and uncontrolled and chaotic, you're a hot mess. And if you're all tight and controlled and finished, maybe it's all kind of dead. But it's like finding where is that place in the middle. It's sort of like surfing that wave somewhere on that edge between the things that we've finished and we're done with and we can put away, and the things that still like move us. So it was this kind of like, maybe it's like music or whatever, but coming from like the underneath into something more finished above, more final. But I wanted the final things to be like just at the tips, like just at the edges. Was there other questions people had that I can answer? Yeah?
I have a question about what you just said, because if I understood it, when you are in the opening gambit of working, that somehow things feel much more alive, and that sometimes you can finish and it feels dead. Is that because you've worked it too much? That you've departed from a felt state that was sort of moving through you into the work, and as you kept working at it, or something that got desiccated?
Yeah, I mean, so one of I don't know how to explain this because it doesn't sound logical, but I feel like it matters less to me what my drawings look like than what they feel like. But when you're making artwork, like you're just looking at it all the time. And sometimes actually, literally I'm closing my eyes to draw so that I can remind myself, like feel what I'm doing and not be looking at it. But then the tendency is like, especially I get closer to a show, I'm like, well, what will this look like? And how will it look here? And even coming here, this is sort of the perfect place to not make something totally finished, to make it, like the barn is not finished. And the barn is so raw and beautiful in its rawness. And so it felt like I had that to work with, but it's easy to just keep working over something or overthinking it, or I'm trying to describe it in my head and I start explaining it, and then the explanation takes over the drawing itself. JC?
Well, I was going to ask, sort of building on that and some of the discussion that we had, when you were conceiving of this space, or when you were conceiving of this show, did you have a plan for where all these pieces were going to go? Or did that, we're talking about kind of how this could have changed so much depending on how you hung it. Did you have that plan? Did that kind of come as you were, like, is that part of the process for you as well?
So I tried to have a plan. And I had like all of the, like all the measurements, all the architectural like drawings for this space. I came here, I measured. I came again, I measured. But I'm not that precise of a person. And it's not just me, but this space is not that precise. And the idea that, like, I think in some anxiety, I felt like I could measure my way into the most fitting show. But it doesn't, but then when I show up and it doesn't really fit, and it turns out like every one of these beams is slightly, not only like by width, but even by height, they're all slightly different. So the more precise I had been in my measurements, the worse the pieces were at fitting. And I had to remember that what I am doing here is, like, in my studio alone, what I'm interested in, this kind of improvisation or feeling some kind of life force, like that I have to maintain. It was actually maybe challenging for me to maintain that going out into a public space. Like, I don't know how to be, it's hard, it feels hard to be kind of raw or partially done or in the midst of something publicly. And how do you present that publicly without something looking unfinished or undone? And that's a question I get a lot, like, why don't you make these into something more final? And they do. I sell pieces that are on paper and framed, and they look beautiful. But it's always hard to know how to balance that, to move back from that perfectly fitted, perfectly measured, perfectly finalized thing into the place that it still feels alive. And sometimes I'll draw, like these drawings here, each one in themselves might not have taken very long. One of these was done on the floor here in June. But I'll do one and then I think like, oh, this is really bad. It's dead, it's overdrawn, throw it out, do another one. And I have to keep doing them until, and all those knobby bulb things, those two. I did so many of them and would just throw them out like, this is a bad bulb. This is a bad bulb. But also along the lines of some of the metaphors you're using, like when you have a garden that grows, like the things it grows from, the things that happen in the dirt with a seed as it starts to sprout, those are so strange and ugly and powerful and lumpy, and I'm interested in that, like things not being beautiful, but things being kind of ugly, beautiful.
This is way off track, what you're saying, but I've been looking at a lot of these and a little bit of that one, and you mentioned, I mean, you referred to these as individual drawings in a way earlier. I feel like your relationship to the rectangle is an interesting conversation to have, because in my mind, each one of these rectangles is in itself a very beautiful drawing.
Yeah, I mean, so and this was something actually Jess and I talked a lot about. You know, I could come in with a bunch of rectangles and put them on the wall, but it didn't seem like when I brought them in that it was talking to the barn or the space. So that's where the cutting came out. And the cutting was, it is somehow how I work in the studio sometimes, with that sense of like just redoing and redoing things so that they're never quite done. I think you said ecology of things changing. But like these come with their own space, and I'm interested in space and negative space. And when I have a whole rectangle, I can control, it's not just the drawing, but the space above the drawing and the space around the drawing. And once I cut them out, it's the barn that holds the space around the drawing and not the rectangle, which is great and interesting, but that was kind of what I was thinking about. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm just curious, when you make, say, that one.
Like this one?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like when you were drawing those, were you imagining that in relation to the vertical and the more differentiated form, or were you just in that more inchoate mood?
This was kind of the main piece. This was the thing I spent the most time on, and that was the like center of the show for me, and I wanted it to be in dirt. And then I really like the idea of drawing dirt, and especially dirt by imagination. Like how often had I spent in my life imagining dirt? It seemed like a very enjoyable thing to do. And we just like, we don't think about dirt. I don't think about dirt. And so then it was so fun drawing dirt, but those came later, and I wanted it to be in that bed, and I wanted the things to like fall below what was beautiful or made sense or what was articulate. There was someone else who had a.
It feels very, I mean, I can't help but to say it this way. It feels like what's happening in the dirt, I just see it as the unconscious. You know, the place of raw energy, unthought words, just, it's interesting. Was that part of the piece originally? The top?
Well, my studio is not this big, so everything was kind of side by side, but no, it wasn't.
Because somehow that feels, I don't know, sequentially, this feels still like you're in the land of something merging between something unconscious to something.
Yeah, and that's more like finished and yeah.
Did you want to finish that because of the chatter about the finishing?
Probably, yes.
It's interesting.
Very random question, and the answer might be no. But do you have a favorite entrance to the show? Among
Entrance?
the three? Yes.
Oh. I hadn't thought about it. But it's so cool, that big door, to come at the big door, just because it's beautiful. Any other question? Yeah?
When I spoke before, I believe I said I like everything in the show. It's a very nice show. And you talk about, finding, I think, the energy in work. And that's, for me, is that composition that clicks, basically. So I think about it more as composition. It's easier to be conscious of what's going on when you think about things balancing each other out. But I can narrow down what I like a little bit, and I would say there's two works, just sort of from my perspective where I'm sitting here, and they're quite different from each other. One's very subtle, and one is quite visually dynamic. And what I like is the tall drawing, which you call the centerpiece, and I like it because it still has the wildness of the briar patch over here, but it also still has sort of the emerging of something a little more concrete than the chaos. I was interested in your description of a hot mess, and made me think of a Jackson Pollock. And what do you think of is a Jackson Pollock a hot mess? Is it a hot mess or is it hot? That's a good thing. But anyway, I like this sort of balance between a little bit of chaos and a little bit of definition. So I think that's one of my favorite works. The other is this form over here that reminds me of a mushroom with a tall stem that we often see in the forest. And there it's very different. I like to use the word minimalism, which is sort of the opposite of what this is. It's certainly not minimalist. This is sort of, I like that sort of the quietness of it, and there's the beauty and the subtlety, and it interacts very well with the form. So that's my two favorite pieces.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
He said that he was interested in the kind of hot mess briar patch going. You were saying that you had two favorite pieces, this one and then the one over there, which seemed more like subtle and delicate, and you used the word minimalist. Did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know nothing of your popular, and I knew exactly when I first came in. I said, spoke about the life force and reading the discussion of the life force, then it made perfect sense to me because life force is not constant or linear, and it's probably, these are an exploration of your fluctuations of life force in the course of time. And to me, it really consolidated the beauty of it.
Thank you. And thanks for saying that, because that is also what I'm trying to draw across is from like the little seedy thing in the dirt up through like a polished flower. And that there would be some way to draw all the way across that lifespan, kind of, and not just the fun. Yeah, it's not linear. No, it's not linear. Yeah.
I like that the eruption underground, you don't know actually where the flower is going to come up. It could come up anywhere. It's all churning away, and then it just erupts, and there it is. So it's very exciting about this lower level. Yeah, it's cool.
Thank you. That was also part of my interest in the dirt. Like, we couldn't look into a pile of dirt and know where a seed would come from or what would be the thing that we then call beautiful 3 months later or something. We just see dirt. So I was trying to draw dirt with some potential in it. So I just want to say thank you to Jess again. It was really amazing opportunity to be here and to work in such a space. And it's not an opportunity one gets very often to just be given space. And I really loved it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jason. Oh, and if people wouldn't mind or would want to just give us emails, and then we can put you either on a VTS list or on my list or both lists, other lists that we come up with.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you also to JC for participating in this, and Tara for agreeing to have her artist talk include this. And just so you all know, majority of our programming is proposal based. So when Tara sent her proposal in, this was reviewed by a committee of artists that had previously shown at Duck Creek, and then reviewed by a smaller committee, an advisory committee, and then so we have many layers of and despite how kind of abstract, this is one of the few times where we've taken a leap and allowed someone to sort of build the exhibition without a finite, and I think it was a wonderful brave thing for her to do, and I appreciate her putting all that time and effort into it. So thank you.
Thank you, JC.
Thanks, JC.
You all felt that as well, that by hearing each other and it really drawing you to different parts of the art that you might not have yourself. And I don't know, Tara, for you as an artist, I feel like a lot of what they were talking about is a lot of what you were talking about. They seem to really feel that emotion and that movement. And so I think
it was so great. I'm really grateful to everyone. Thank you.